Now, ever since that deeply controversial decision by the United States on Tuesday, benchmark oil prices have risen by over 1.25%. Now, that's a very troubling prospect for net oil importers. You see, prices have already risen by over 15% so far this year. They've hit three-year high several times already. If Iran's oil supplies are cut out by US sanctions, its biggest clients, and that includes China, India, Korea, Turkey, they would all be hard hit. And all of these countries that I've just mentioned, they all import more than 200,000 barrels of crude a day from Iran. Earlier on, I spoke to John Payne from Oxford Economics to get a sense of where oil prices could go this year. He started by making the case for why the current price hike is a little overdone.
Obviously, there are temporary shocks that are hitting the market at the moment, but this is mainly exaggerated because of how tight the oil market is. We think the fundamentals point to quite a bearish picture, and we have in the last few days upgraded our forecast for oil over the next 2 years by about $2 a barrel here and there. But overall, we do expect it to fall from these current high levels, and this is mainly because we see falling oil demand in the coming years because of China moving away from a strong manufacturing economy to a more consumption-driven economy, and we also see the large rises in US shale production helping to kind of offset these negative production cuts.
Right. I'm glad you brought up American shale, because that was essentially my next question. To what extent, though, do these price hikes we're seeing now, to what extent do they incentivize shale producers to add a lot more capacity? Or have we hit essentially the limit to what capacity can be added at current prices?
We do still forecast for them to increase production. We do see them not holding up in the coming few months and for the coming year. There is a problem with there are some producers there who have kind of capped their gains at $40 a barrel. They kind of locked in these prices last year. However, we found that these make up less than half of all US shale producers, so there's significant room for them to increase their production, and this should help firstly offset the negative. This should help offset the negative production cuts, and also should also help spur investment and spur activity in the US.
To what extent can that increase in American production, though, offset, for argument's sake, if Iran's oil output to the rest of the world does go down? Venezuela, of course, is reducing its input into the market. Angola has been having a hard time. To what extent can American shale offset that decline in production?
Well, we don't think that the US could make it up entirely. We envisage three potential scenarios with regards to Iranian oil. We can see them reducing it by $300,000 barrels a day. This would have wouldn't have a significant impact on the global economy, but we envisage that the US would step in, would cover some of the losses, but not all. There is potential for OPEC, the rest of OPEC, and Saudi Arabia to step in. Because there's almost a sweet spot that they want prices to be at, and because they wouldn't want to encourage production too much further, because as we've seen in the first quarter of this year, the US have been ramping up production even with oil prices at $70, so imagine what it would be over 80.
So what essentially should we expect to happen at the meeting in June?
Because obviously it's hard to tell, because to start with, we aren't fully sure what these sanctions on Iran will be. We don't know if it's Trump's bark being louder than his bite. He might be saying all these things, but could go back to original sanctions. It's kind of hard to tell at the moment.
So what about the effect on the demand side with oil prices at the current levels? Because a paper that I did read essentially focused on what would happen if crude hits $85 a barrel. How would that translate to growth and inflation, especially in developing economies, quote unquote, like China, South Africa, India?
Well, in emerging market economies, we see the impact being the greatest because a lot of them are highly dependent on oil. They have huge oil imports, like you said, China, India, Indonesia. They import a lot of oil. So as oil prices do rise, and if they hit $85 a barrel, we're likely to see significant hits to business investment, consumer confidence. And on the flip side of that, we also see countries such as Russia, Saudi Arabia, the UAE will receive significant boosts to their GDP because they are net oil exporters. On the inflation side of things, we estimated that, we found that the countries that where oil makes up a large portion of their inflation basket, this will tend to push up their inflation in their economy, which will obviously dampen consumer confidence further, reduce spending.